Hello and welcome to another fabulous podcast series coming to you on PodHub. And this time we are ready to meet the tech titans in Sri Lanka. It's brought to you by Hutch. A big thank you out to Hutch for being a part of this 8-part podcast series. We're going to be speaking to some very influential voices in the tech industry in Sri Lanka, icons in the digital industry in Sri Lanka, individuals who stand shoulder to shoulder with the rest of the world, all here from Sri Lanka. We got a fabulous series lined up for you. Like I said earlier on, 8 great individuals, all from Sri Lanka, all basically representing different industries in the technological world in Sri Lanka. Now today, of course, we're starting off the first podcast series with the CEO of WSO2, Sanjiva Weerawarana. Sanjiva, thank you so much and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Zach. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you back on the show again.
Yes, it's been a while now.
And lots to talk about. Obviously, there's been a fair amount of transformation at WSO2. We're going to be talking about that also. Sanjiva, let's talk about you. I mean, you've been a pivotal figure and an iconic figure in the technological world, especially in the open source industry. And before we get into the nitty-gritties of open source and WSO2, your journey, when did it start, why did it start, and why WSO2?
Okay. So I'm a computer scientist by training.
Right.
I spent 9 years in university studying, finished a PhD. Then I was faculty / postdoc for 3 years. And then I worked in IBM research for 8 years. After that, working on sort of core infrastructure for enterprises. And right throughout, I was always, if you go back even to my undergrad days onwards, I've always been working on creating technology to help developers create applications. That's kind of been my theme for now almost 40 years. I finished my bachelor's in 1988.
Right.
So 36 years, I guess, since then. And throughout that period, it's always been like, okay, how do you make that process easier and easier and easier? I was never interested in starting a company. I started teaching Java in 1993 when Java was in like 1.03 version.
Infancy.
Infancy, very much infancy. There was no adoption. I was one of the people teaching it. Then I was teaching web infrastructure in 94, which is again very, very infancy. But I had no idea of this concept of starting a company. I knew everything about it, but never hit me that, you could actually make a business.
Right.
And I came back to Sri Lanka in 2001, halfway through my work in IBM. And I started, when I came back, I was already working on open source software as a way to get software out in front of more people.
Right.
And by then, this stack called Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP had already become very popular and everybody was using open source stuff. So I knew there was a way to get technology in front of a lot of people by using open source as a way of giving it to people.
Right.
But in Sri Lanka, everybody was focused on saying, go use open source, but not necessarily create open source.
Okay.
So for me, that's like saying, okay, you are addicted to a drug, which is software, and instead of buying it from this drug dealer, go buy it from that drug dealer.
Right.
But I'm still an addict. I'm not in the drug value chain. Okay, maybe not a popular one to take.
Fantastic example.
There's a lot of money in that value chain, right? In that drug value chain, there's a guy who farms, and there's people who distribute and package up and give the product, and then the buyers who people who buy.
Right.
Being on this end is the worst spot.
Okay.
Right. The starting end is also low. I mean, the guy who actually takes care of the plant, very low. But so the people in the middle are the ones who make bulk of the money, right? So being a consumer of technology puts you always onto the receiving end. It constrains you because you cannot create. And that's the place that we started with. And then open source approach of saying, hey, why can't we create from Sri Lanka? That was the thesis of starting WSO2. And before WSO2, something called Lanka Software Foundation, which is a non-profit foundation I started to help Sri Lankan developers to create software from Sri Lanka for the world.
Okay. Right.
But then that's a little bit of a communistic statement.
Yeah.
Right. Of course, we are in the Sahodara area, so we can talk about those. But the point is, it's about saying we'll create a public good and give it away free for everybody to use.
Okay.
Well, that's wonderful, and it's very good, and I'm a big fan of it, and I do that every day now. Still, you as a country and as a company, as an individuals, you need to make money. I mean, it's part of the economic reality.
Right.
So there is a business model for that. And in 2001, I went around to a bunch of companies in Sri Lanka trying to convince them to start a company on top of this open source stuff, start a business.
Okay.
Nobody was interested because they are used to services.
Right.
Most tech companies in Sri Lanka sell people, not product. And selling people is much easier. You want something done? Sure, I can do it. I can get two guys get together. I can do it.
Right.
It's much harder to say, hey, I have created a solution to a problem that you don't even know you already have, and why don't you buy it from me? That's the product. Right? So eventually, the only way for me to show that this open source effort we had started through Lanka Software Foundation in 2003 was not just some let's ooh la la, let's be nice to the world kind of thing, but actually an economic opportunity was to actually start a company.
Now, obviously, WSO2 fundamentally, it stands for its commitment to open source, right?
Yeah.
But a model that has actually challenged the enterprise software business out there. Now, what in terms of you, was there a motive for you to basically take on the enterprise software industry with open source? Was that one of the main reasons, or did that actually build?
No, that was so when I was in IBM, I worked on this area called web services,
right,
which was a standards, kind of like a English for computer to computer communication,
right?
And when we wanted, so we worked on these specifications, these new standards and so on, but then you want people to use it. So there's two ways of building software. I can add a piece of software and I can sell it to you, and I can just give it to you,
right?
And give it to you with the source code, so you can do whatever you want. So by then, this idea of open source as a distribution vehicle for software was already established. So if you want everybody in the world to use something, the best way is make a better product, give it away free. Right? Then people kind of use it. WhatsApp is a great example. WhatsApp made no money when they were bought for $19 billion. Right. They had a tiny revenue, negligible amount of revenue. So that kind of product. So enterprise infrastructure means you are creating technology that businesses can use. Now you mentioned Hutch is a sponsor of this series.
That's right.
So Hutch has different product lines. They have different backend systems. I think they're called BSS and OSS systems in the telco world. They need to put that all together when they are selling to the enterprises. The package the enterprise gets needs to get a nice digital experience.
Right.
To build that, they need software. That's the kind of stuff that WSO2 will do.
Right. Now, was there, in terms of trying to push open source, when you started with WSO2, what were the challenges you actually did face in pushing open source?
Yeah.
Because the reason I'm asking, of course, is the fact that now from the time that you started WSO2 to where it is right now, when you say open source, you basically feel that you are vulnerable out there. Right? Clearly, the security systems have increased and it's so much better right now. We will also get into the misconceptions of open source when we go on. But what were the challenges initially when you started? So,
going back to 2005 or going back to 2003 or going back to 1998 when I first started doing open source work and so on, at that time, open source was considered a sort of a communistic threat on the capitalist software industry.
Okay.
You had companies like Microsoft, SAP, and so on constantly saying this is very harmful, just kind of like the AI narrative we have right now.
Right.
About AI, there's a group of companies that are saying, no, this must be protected, you can't give it to the Chinese, must be with the Americans, all this kind of stuff about, we are the good guys, they're the bad guys, can't give it to them, kind of thing. Same kind of mindset was there about open source software.
Okay.
Today, Microsoft is probably the largest contributor to open source software. Right? IBM, in fact, was one of the first large tech companies that adopted open source because they saw it as a way to run a commercial business that also had where the open source software was an advantage, not a disadvantage.
Okay.
So let me come to your point about security.
Right.
So it's it was one of the there is a system called FUD, fear, uncertainty, and deception. Right? So if I want to convince you to do something, I can FUD you basically. I can make you scared. I can make you question your foundations, and I can lie to you.
Right.
Right. Then you can do what I want you to do. Right. That's a common marketing tactic that companies use against each other.
Right.
So during I would say about 2000 to about 2010 plus, majority of the software companies, Microsoft, SAP, all these big software companies in the world, were FUDding the hell out of open source.
Okay.
right? And one of the big FUDs was, oh no, code is there, all the bad guys can get to the source code. And so that means you'll be attacked more. History has proven repeatedly that open source software is far more secure than non-open source software. And I can just justify it in two very simple forms. One is the open source software source code is available. For every ill-intentioned engineer or technical person out there in the world, there are 10 to hundreds of well-intentioned technical people. So just as much as, say, you're a bad guy, right, and you know how to hack the code, so you find, there's something wrong here. There are just as much as, for one of you, there are tens to hundreds of people who look at the code and say, there's something wrong, let me fix it.
Right.
Instead of let me exploit it.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
So that concept is called, in the front of 1,000 pairs of eyes, all bugs are shallow.
Right.
All software has bugs. It doesn't matter whether it's software WSO2 produces, Hutch produces, Microsoft, IBM, Oracle, TIBCO, Amazon, Google, Baidu, whatever, it doesn't matter, they have bugs. That's the reality of the software manufacturing technology process we are still at. Right? The whole industry is 75 years old.
Right, yeah.
Child, it's not even a child.
That's right.
You know,
That's right.
Civil engineering is, I don't know, tens of thousands of years, and we still have bugs in buildings we make. Right. So but now here you have an opportunity to bring a lot of people in to see this source code. So that's one key factor.
Okay.
Right. So in fact, so that's a complete opposite of what this FUD says.
Right.
The other side is many open source projects are built by consuming other open source projects. So the contributor base you have to a particular offering is a much more diverse and broad brain set than any one company can muster. So let's take one of the largest companies in the world today in software, say Google, Amazon, Microsoft. There's three big cloud players, right? And you take any of the other large companies, let's say they have 10,000 engineers that are working on something. So for those 10,000 engineers, if you have a open source piece of software, the contributor base can be far, far larger. The observing base is much, much larger. The reporting base is much, much larger. Therefore, incrementally, the open source software tends to get better over time always.
So what is the misconception of open source software that still exists today?
Absolutely. It's capitalism, it's money.
Right.
I want you to pay. I don't want you to use my software free of charge. Okay, I got to scare you somehow, right?
Right.
To some extent, even we WSO2 do it.
Right.
Right? Because if our model is, so there's to understand how you make money from open source, there's a very simple formula you can keep in mind. One, it's very simple. There are two things in the world. There's time, there's money. That's it. If you have time, you can use your time to save money.
Right.
When I was a grad student, when I had a car, I used to change oil, I used to change brake pads in the car. Because I didn't have the $20 when I was in the US to pay somebody else to do it.
Right.
At the time it was $20 to change oil. I would do it myself. Right now I know how to remove the lug nut, I know how to replace oil filter, do all that because it was saving $20 and I had the time. Right? If you have money, you can use money to save time.
Right.
So, I don't change oil anymore.
Yeah.
I'll pay somebody else to change the oil.
That's right.
I do far less cooking.
Right.
I will do less cleaning because I can afford to pay for it. It saves my time. My time is more valuable for me, right? So it's time and money. When it comes to open source technology, if you are, let's say you're a bank, let's say you're Hutch, you're using WSO2 software, right? Maybe I shouldn't pick on Hutch anymore. People's Bank, you can see it right in front of us.
Right.
So People's Bank is using, say, open source database. Now, as a bank, their core mission is protect the depositors, protect the customers, protect the shareholders, protect the employees. That's their core mission. Creating a better database is not their mission, right? So for them, for them to say, oh, we have the time and the skill, we need to save some money, is silly actually.
Right.
Because the risk for them is infinite. If somebody exploits some problem, so the advantage of having a commercial relationship with a company that does provide support is you are de-risking yourself. Right? Wow. So companies will continuously try to tell you, oh, no, this open source thing is no good, you must pay me so I can give you a better thing.
So Sanjiva, how does adopting open source software accelerate the digital transformation for businesses that actually are there right now? Because we did speak about time and money.
Yeah.
Now, adopting open source software for businesses, clearly they're adopting it for one of the two reasons, either because of the time or the money.
Yeah.
How does that accelerate their business?
Okay, so open source software by itself, I can't tell you honestly that this software is better than that software.
Okay.
It's not because of that.
Right.
Primarily, it's about the fact that by using open source stuff, I have more freedom to operate within the company than without. So let me give you an example. So if I have to buy a piece of software for 10 rupees, I need, and using company money for it, somebody has to sign off on it. So I need approval. Then some lawyer gets involved saying, oh, okay, let's check the license, and so on. It can take days and weeks. And if it's a big buy, it has to go all the way to the board and takes months and years.
Yeah.
If it's open source stuff, now the company should have policy on what open source licenses you can use. So there are variations and you got to understand what those are. But as long as it's within the parameters that you've been given, you can download anything and just use it. So that means as an engineer, when I want to write something, when I want to create something, I can pick up the pieces I need without waiting for approval. This unshackling of creative minds, developers are creative people.
Yes.
The last thing you want to do to a developer is say, here's a rule, here's a rule, here's a rule, here's an approval process, another workflow, another one you got to do, before you can write your little bit of code.
So you curb them.
You curb them.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare. People don't like to work in organizations that make it hard for them to create.
True.
Only the less creative will survive there.
Yeah.
Which means you get the worst developers.
That's right.
The good guys go.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, it's great in terms of the open source technology that's actually available. Is there a success story that you can actually tell us? I mean, maybe let's even talk about Sri Lanka. If there is a success story that were apprehensive in adopting open source because of the FUD that you basically mentioned, but now they have sort of implemented, are enjoying it right now.
Absolutely. So Sri Lanka, there are. So let's say, I don't think I'm supposed to name our customers, so I won't name them directly.
Yeah, I mean,
actually, Dialog is public. So Dialog, Hutch competitor Dialog,
right?
They're very public about their use of our software. They're one of our big customers here. Everything that you do on Dialog ends up touching our software somewhere.
Okay.
Right? This is our open source software.
Right.
So the core of Dialog's massive business relies on open source software. And it was never a problem for them. It was never. They are paying us for subscription, so that's good. We're happy with that.
Okay.
We won't complain.
Right.
But there are also other people who don't pay and who use our software. There are large countries that have critical infrastructure that is running on WSO2 software without paying. Right. Very large countries.
Right.
And because the thing with open source, so we only talked about the enablement for an individual, but there's another part that you have to understand about open source, which is about the freedom aspect. The concept of free and open source software, we kind of shortened that to open source, is really about the fact that the software, when I give you some software, you are free to do whatever you want with it.
Right.
So for example, WSO2 software can be used by a terrorist organization to kill people. Now, it's not something you say, well, that's not morally okay.
Right.
That's true. But from an open source license perspective, it's fine. Because I've given the software to the world, anybody can do whatever they want with it. If they're using it to kill people, not a good use of our software, but
it's available.
It's available,
right?
And so, but that's an extreme case. Now let's take something like, I have this international situation. So let me give an example. WSO2 has customers in 94 countries. When the Ukraine war started, we at that time were a pure US company. Now we have additional parents because of our whole transaction.
Right.
So we are under US rules. So US says, no more doing business with Russia. So we had paying customers in Russia.
Right.
So we had to cut them off, saying that's it. Like immediately cut them off, saying we cannot take your money anymore.
Wow.
We cannot provide support for you anymore. But because our software is open source, they can continue to use it.
Right.
They can continue to use it. They can improve it. They can bring their own technical people and do whatever they want with it.
Why would they want to still? I'm not saying in general. If you're looking at it, why would they want to still pay you if open source is widely available out there?
So for every paying customer we have 700 plus paying customers. My bet is we have 100 to 1,000 non-paying users, production users.
Wow.
Right. We have tens of thousands of downloads every month. Very few people pay us. That's how it's supposed to work.
Okay.
Right? You're not supposed to. The point of open source is not to just make money. The point of open source is to create a public good. And if you don't believe that, if your goal is to monetize every single person who downloads the thing, you're not an open source company at all. You're just a company that uses this as a way to get into your wallet.
So you're pretty much looking at like a community collaboration here.
Yeah.
So X designs a code, Y makes it better, A makes it even better, B sort of looks at some chinks in it, and it honestly becomes a community collaboration.
Yeah, so that's the other aspect of open source. So we were so far talking about using open source. Now you are bringing in the point of contributing
to
that, right? Yes, contribution is a little bit more challenged now because everything is open source.
Right.
So when we started in 2005, there was no thing called GitHub. Right, I'll explain what GitHub is. There was something called SourceForge, which was a way for people to host open source projects for other people to contribute. At the time, at the peak of SourceForge, there were about 100,000 open source projects, right? And of that, 99% or 97, 98 something percent were one-person open source projects.
Right.
That means I wrote some code, I put it out to the internet. Nobody else contributed, but it's still available as a one-person open source project. Right? Now we have something called GitHub, which is now owned by Microsoft, which is based on something called Git, which is a distributed code versioning system. Anyway, it makes it very easy for you to write some code and give it to the world and other people to contribute.
Okay.
Right? Trivially easy. There are 50 million plus registered accounts in GitHub.
Wow.
Right? And millions of open source projects in GitHub. So how many developers are there in the world? Around 25 to 30 million.
Right.
Okay. So maybe a little bit more. Ballpark 30 million, let's say. Right? Maybe 35, 25, something like that. So there are basically more projects than there are developers now.
Right.
So it's a different world now than what was 10, 15 years ago when there were more developers than projects. So you had more people collecting together to contribute to something. So what has happened with open source is many open source efforts are now actually company funded.
Right. Okay.
So like WSO2 pays engineers to write code and just give it to everybody.
That's exactly what I was actually getting into in terms of what has WSO2, the community, you've contributed to the growth and the innovation of open source.
So we are a middleware company. We make infrastructure for enterprises, whatever the enterprise is, right? We have customers in every industrial, every domain. So that horizontal infrastructure is based on open standards, based on interoperability standards, on a variety of specifications that we comply to so that other people can use it easier.
Right.
To do that, we leverage other pieces of code. And there are other things that are built on top of us that leverage our code. So the biggest contribution is in the form of we depend on other people and other people depend on us.
Right.
The layer we write, a lot of the code is actually written by our engineers. It's still completely open, anybody can see, anybody can contribute, but because of the explanation I gave a little bit ago about there are more projects than there are developers.
Right.
So you don't get that random guy goes home after work at a bank and in the night they are bored with their day job but pays the bills. In the night they do what they are passionate about. Right?
You're really excited about open source, aren't you?
Absolutely.
I mean, you clearly invested all your time and your money into pushing open source. Do you feel there is a point of saturation for open source, or do you feel that there's still room for it to grow?
So I see open source as a philosophy.
Okay.
Right? Which is basically saying, why do we need to waste resources doing the same thing over and over again?
Right.
Now I understand let's see, you have a bunch of cameras here, right?
Right.
Looks like they're the same brand. Let's say, but there are 3, 4, 5 camera brands which are probably equal quality.
Right.
And they compete on various niches and edges. So same thing is true about software. But then when you go down one level further, if you look at the lens, for example, now many of the phone camera lenses are made by 1 or 2 or 3 companies. Right? Now this is the challenge the US has with China, because a lot of the supply chain goes through China because core componentry comes from China. So you can't just disconnect from China because of that. Right? So same way with open source. Open source software is really about that level of build something that everybody needs. Why in the world do we need 17 of these things being written by 17 different engineers, having 17 different bugs, not 17, 170, because each one has 10 engineers.
Right.
When 10 engineers can do the job perfectly fine. Right? It's a waste of resources. So to me, it's about doing the right thing for the world, which is we all need software. The software has eaten the world, blah, blah, blah. Everything is about software now. That's the way we are going now. Digital is fundamental. To make digital work, you need software. So why do we bother making the same software over and over and over again? The majority of the world uses Linux. As you know, done by one kid, 21-year-old kid, Linus Torvalds, right? Originally. Now, many people have contributed. Massive project now, but started by one kid's innovation. And the majority of the world just builds on top of that. Android, which many of us use, is on top of that kernel. Right. And billions of devices are running on top of that. Now, does it make sense to have another one? Actually, it never did until the US decided, we're going to play politics with that. Now there's another one. There's Harmony OS from China, from Huawei, I think. And Russia has another version which is not based on Android Core anymore. Right? So politics got in the way.
Right.
But if not for politics, does the world really need 3 different operating systems that do the same thing? No, waste of money and waste of time. Put all the creative energy to make that perfect.
Now, you just mentioned the 21-year-old Linux, of course. That's a big story. Almost everybody in the tech industry, it's like a thesis you need to know before you move forward. Now, what would your advice be to the young tech enthusiasts out there, especially maybe even in Sri Lanka, who are interested in contributing to open source projects? What would you tell them?
Study hard and go deep. That's it. Basically, a lot of people think that, you start companies by just having some idea, having a coffee chat, and then boom, I'm going to go start a company.
Right.
Well, maybe it triggers something.
Yeah.
But the core of the tech depth must be in you. How do you get that? You learn. You take the time to learn. A lot of people have this shortcut formula in their life plan. This current generation in particular.
Oh my God.
Right? Like, I want to be a king tomorrow. Well, I'm sorry, but hang on a bit.
Yeah.
I'm 57 years old now.
Right.
I started WSO2, I was 38.
Right.
So there's a mantra, there's a standard mantra in expertise saying you need to work on the same problem for 10 years to become an expert in it.
Right.
Because it just takes 1,000 hours a year times 10,000 hours to obviously some rule of thumb, right? Not a fact.
Right.
But takes 10,000 hours, and you can't put the 10,000 hours in 1 year because then it doesn't go in. So it does take time. Everybody looks at Zuckerberg. He quit university. Started Facebook. Look at him now.
Yeah, if he can do it, I can do it.
Exactly. So remember, for every Zuckerberg, there are Zuckerberg is 1 in a billion, not 1 in a million.
Right.
Elon Musk is 1 in a billion. Elon is a good example. Elon was reading 3, 4, 5 books at a time from the time he was like this size kind of person. The guy is his brain is off somehow, right? It's not like
rewired.
He's rewired, specially wired.
Right.
And then went to Stanford. Was doing a PhD in theoretical physics. When he decided this is boring, I'm going to go work on this PayPal company. Right? So he's not your average kid. And he knows how to send rockets and catch rockets and dig holes into the ground and do electric vehicles and do this hovercraft, this hyperloop stuff, and so on, because he understands physics to its core. How did he understand physics to its core? He has studied and studied and studied and studied. He reads books and he reads papers and he reads everything. So if you're a kid and trying to start something, take the time to learn.
Right.
So my advice, WSO2 hires people who are straight out of college. That's our normal hiring principle, right? We hire fresh graduates. So they are in the range of 22 to 25 when they finish the degree, depending on where they studied and all kinds of circumstances. So when people say, okay, I always ask, what do you want to do? What kind of? I interview every single person. I'm the last interview for every single person. I'm also the last exit interview as well. For anybody who's leaving. And I always ask, what do you want to do? What's your motivation? Why did you study this? And if I find that they're all about money, I don't hire them.
Right.
I don't care how smart you are, I don't hire them.
Right.
There's got to be purpose beyond money. Money is not a purpose in my world. If that's your purpose, please go work somewhere else. I don't care how smart you are. The other thing I try to get them to understand is because everybody is interested in this generation saying, my goal is become a manager in 5 years. I'm like, oh God. What the hell does that mean? You don't want to do anymore, you want to tell other people to do? Is that your point?
Yeah.
If you tell me I want to lead things, that's different from saying be a manager.
Right.
So that's one. The thing is, then you have to ask, then I ask people, say, okay, you're 25 years old, your generation is not going to die till 100. Right? Our generation is kicking on till 80 to 90 now.
Right.
Medical technology will keep them alive way past 100. So you got 75 years left. So you think you're going to retire at 55, work for 25 and then live for another 50 doing nothing?
Yeah.
Who's going to pay your bills?
Yeah.
Right? So you have another 50 years of work life left. So what the hell is the hurry? And if you want to become CEO, start a company today, you're CEO. That's how I became CEO. I started a company, called myself CEO.
What does WSO2 stand for? I don't think I've ever read that anywhere.
Okay, officially it doesn't stand for anything.
Okay.
But it came from Web Service Oxygen.
Oh.
WS from Web Services, which was the core technology that we started off in 2005.
Right.
The same concept still exists, but it's not the same concepts are what powers the interconnectivity of the web today also.
Right.
O2 Oxygen, because our model was about giving free software and giving support.
Right.
And inside the O, inside the logo, there's a heartbeat sign.
Right.
That's a life support symbol, saying we are providing support for web services.
Interesting.
But the name, actually, that wasn't the first name.
Oh, it wasn't?
No, the company was, I wanted to call it Serendipity for Sri Lanka.
Okay.
Right? Serendipity.com was not available.
Okay.
So you couldn't, those days, 2005, .com had to be there if you're a company.
That's right.
A done deal, right?
Yeah.
There's no like .io, all this whatever you want today. So we registered it as Serendip Systems. And
Okay.
the Lanka version was called Serendip Systems Lanka Private Limited and Serendip Systems Incorporated in the US. Then when we were raising money, the first angel investor said, that's not a name for a software company. And he said that on Friday, August 9th, I'm going to say 11th is when he got the money, so not 9th, a couple of days before that. The Friday before, said, I don't like the name, you got to change the name, otherwise I'm not giving the money.
Wow. Okay.
Right? So we had a weekend to come up with a name that he would accept, and for which there was a .com and a .net and a .org available.
Right. Okay.
So we spent a lot of time cranking through, trying various, and I was very keen that the name has to have some symbolism, some meaning.
Okay.
You can pick up a random name, but there's no story. So
Right.
for me, you get purpose for whatever you do from stories.
That's so true.
No stories like
It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it's so true. Sanjiva, when you're not immersed in technology and you're not immersed in open source coding and so on and so forth, what do you do? I mean, in terms of taking some time off, what do you have hobbies that you basically have sort of built on? What do you do?
So I have 3 other foundations I run.
Oh, really?
So WSO2 is my day job.
Right.
And Avinya Foundation, which is focused on educating people who are falling off the various education systems and kind of going nowhere, poor
Okay.
kids basically.
Right.
So that we run one school in Bandaragam. My goal is to start one school in every divisional secretariat long term, which is focused on taking poor kids and kind of really revamping their heart and soul so they have a purpose and they work towards somewhere.
Nice.
Then something called Lanka Software Foundation, I still run that.
Right.
So LSF's goal is to help digitize the country. And we are going to do more stuff from outside, not within government, but as much as we can, we'll do whatever we can from outside. And then another one called Lanka Data Foundation, which is not officially launched yet, but there we take all the publicly available data in Sri Lanka, archive it, connect the dots, and see what the data says.
So how do you have the time for all this? You're creating the time.
So my view of work and these kind of things is like gas in a bottle.
Right.
There's always more gas you can put in the bottle.
Yeah.
And eventually the bottle will blow.
Yeah.
So that's the balance you got to hit, because pressure too much will blow.
Right. Okay. That's fabulous.
But yeah, I mean, for me, look, this is my passion.
Yeah.
It's not work.
Yeah.
To me, if it's work, it's like, okay, I got to finish the work, right? If it's what you care about, what you're interested in doing, it's fine doing it.
I mean, from the last couple of minutes, you've been obviously having chat about it. I mean, we can see how passionate you really are, apart from the company that you're running. But the passion obviously pours out with the open source system that you so believe in, and you have ready-made arguments. If anybody basically wants to attack an open source system, you know exactly where to go. But your passion has driven you the last so many years with WSO2. Is there one area where something actually stands out for you, like the most rewarding experience for you to be where you are right now? So
I have so we started WSO2 for several reasons, and the first one was really show that we could build a software company from this side of the world.
Okay.
Everybody said, no, you can't do it. You got to go to the US.
Right.
Every investor I spoke to said, you live there? No. You come here, then give me the money, no problem. I'm like, no, I'm not coming back. I lived there for a long time. This is home. That's one, right? The other one was that to show that engineers from here are no second class to engineers from anywhere else.
For sure.
Because the general mindset is engineers here are here to do the work. They will send the ideas, you do the work, send the results back, right? That's offshore services. So I would say the first one we've proven to some extent. We'll cross $100 million this year. Right? Knock on wood, fingers crossed, all this stuff. Right? We'll get through $100 million of revenue this year. So we've proven that we can actually build a company from this side of the world that is at reasonable scale, that is globally competitive, and we take on every single company, IBM to Microsoft to whatever company you want, we compete with, and we can win against them. The second one is really about the people.
Right.
So the most passionate thing for me is there are more than 100 people who've gone through WSO2 and have completed PhD degrees in computer science already, right?
Okay.
And we have so many people who have become top technical people in companies all over the world after having been in WSO2 and done some stuff and gone to other places. So that's the real story.
Right.
It's the individual, it's giving people, creative engineers, smart people who are willing to work hard. You need all three together, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It doesn't work if you're just,
True.
work hard but don't have the raw material, doesn't work.
Yeah.
You need everything together. But a lot of people like that don't get an opportunity. So my goal is, how do we give more people that chance, saying, here's the foundation, now you do whatever the heck you want.
Right.
Open the doors for people like that.
Amazing. This is a Thought Leadership podcast series, which of course is called Meet the Tech Titans, which is brought to you by Hutch. And of course, a big thank you to our official venue partner is Liquid Spaces. Gorgeous places, gorgeous venue. And of course, if you're looking for a place where you want to basically, if you're a startup and looking for co-working and co-sharing areas, Liquid Spaces at the 12th floor of the One Gore Face office towers. That's where we are our official venue partner for the podcast series, which is brought to you by Hutch. Meet the Tech Titans, where we speak to influential voices in Sri Lanka who've actually built businesses, who've built industries, who've built supporting systems for the tech world. Sanjiva, it's been absolutely fascinating to obviously listen to your words in terms of the open source technology and also WSO2. Finally, just before we say our goodbyes, what message would you like to convey to aspiring tech individuals out there, young entrepreneurs out there? Because there are so many individuals and young entrepreneurs who obviously have looked up to you, looked up to WSO2 in different times of their lives. And I suppose there are also individuals who have set up different companies, had their start at WSO2. That the roots were basically given there. But it's good to also see that there are lots of youngsters who love tech, who want to move towards that. But the right guidance, I suppose, is what is, sort of lacking. You've given the opportunity, obviously, to speak to us about this. And if you are to give a couple of words of advice to the youngsters out there, what would it be?
So I would say the first thing is you have to believe in what you're doing to the extent that when so many people who are smarter, richer, more experienced, more knowledgeable than you tell you this is not going to work. So we have raised in the history of the company, before the company was bought by EQT, we had raised about $70 million primary capital into the company.
Okay.
Right? I have pitched WSO2 to at least 150 different investors in that period.
Right.
Out of that, we only managed to get 4 to say yes.
Okay.
So it's 4 out of 150. Everybody else either said no or just don't say anything. Most of them don't say anything.
Most of them don't say anything.
That's the usual way of saying no.
Yeah.
Right? So first thing is you got to believe enough to say, I'm going to keep working at it even though everybody else says it's not going to work. They'll have all kinds of reasons as to why something cannot be done. Very few people have reasons as to why something can be done. So that's the first thing I would say. Second part is life is a marathon, not a sprint. So the same comment I made earlier about why the hell are you in a hurry to become a manager or a tech lead or whatever. Instead, focus on, if you're a young person, focus on learning things deeply. So you have an intuitive understanding. Your gut knows the concept.
Yeah.
Not just parroting out something that you read in a book, but the concept goes into you. That takes time. Some brilliant people get it like this. I'm not like that. I have to work hard at things.
Right.
But when I get it. Because I make sure it goes in. Then I can think through abstractly. I don't need to know all the details. That's my strength. Right? But like that, people have to figure out what is their angle.
Right.
So if you're going to be a tech entrepreneur, you got to understand technology. If you don't understand technology, don't be a tech entrepreneur. You can be part of a tech entrepreneurial company. There are many people you need. You need business people, you need communications, you need everybody. It's a family, it's
Yeah.
a village. It takes a village
Yeah.
to raise a company.
Right.
Absolutely correct. But the people who are the core of the tech got to know their stuff inside out. So be patient, work long term, and know what you're doing and keep that purpose going. Don't sell out.
Wow. It's been an absolute privilege, Sanjiva, to have you on
Thank
the
you.
show. Thank you so much. Learned so much about open source technology, learned so much about WSO2. This is what we do. This is Meet the Tech Titans, which is brought to you by Hutch. It is, of course, a thought leadership podcast series. We got so many different influential voices coming up in the tech industry right here in Sri Lanka. We shall see you in the next episode of Meet the Tech Titans, which is brought to you by Hutch.